حبيبي إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيت الله الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. In the name of Allah, the All-Beneficent, the All-Merciful. The month of Ramadan is one of which the Quran was sent down as guidance to mankind, with manifest proofs of guidance in the criterion. Surah Al-Baqarah 185. Sadaqallahu al-Ali wal-Azim. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We would like to welcome you all to our 2025 Shahr Ramadan program at the Islamic Center of America, hosted by the United Network of Islam. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with another opportunity in seeking closeness to Him in the holy month of Ramadan. May Allah accept and reward all your efforts and worship in these blessed days and nights, inshallah. Before we get started with tonight's program, we would like to recite some verses from the Holy Quran. Please help me welcome Brother Ibrahim Ajami to the stage after 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. ثانية على حب الزهراء صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نون والقلم وما يسطرون. ما أنت بنعمة ربك بمجنون وإنك لأجرا غير ممنون وإنك لعلى خلق عظيم. فستبصر ويبصرون بأيكم المفتون. إن ربك هو أعلم بمن ضل عن سبيله وهو أعلم بالمهتدين. فلا تطع المكذبين ودوا لو تدهن فيدهنون ولا تطع كل حلاف مهين هماز مشاء بنميم الدين عطل بعد ذلك زنيم أن كان ذا مال وبنين إذا تتلى عليه آياتنا قال أساطير الأولين سنسمه على الخرطوم سنسمه على الخرطوم إنا بلوناهم كما بلونا أصحاب الجنة إذ أقسموا ليصرمنها مصبحين ولا يستثنون فطاف عليها طائف من ربك وهم نائمون فأصبحت كالصريم فتنادوا مصبحين أن اغدوا على حرثكم إن كنتم صارمين فانطلقوا وهم يتخافتون ألا يدخلنها اليوم عليكم مسكين وغدوا على حرد قادرين فلما رأوها قالوا إنا لضالون بل نحن محرومون قال أوسطهم ألم أقل لكم لولا تسبحون قالوا سبحان ربنا إنا كنا ظالمين صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
Thank you, Brother Ibrahim, for that beautiful recitation. If we can give him another loud salawat. So just a couple announcements before we get started with tonight's program, inshallah. So if the brothers and sisters can please move up to the open spaces in the front so that we can keep an opening for the people waiting, walking in later to sit in the back. Thank you. Also, the question QR code after the program, there are papers around the hall and in front when you walk in that have the QR code for the program. If you would like to submit a question, please scan it and it will direct you to a link to submit your question. For the Medina bookstore, alhamdulillah, through the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the efforts of the sisters and brothers of the UNI, we have made an initiative to truly dedicate our efforts in reviving the Medina bookstore in hopes that we can sincerely give proper Islamic education about our beliefs from our grand respected scholars of the modern era that have done truly great work for the sake of Allah and Islam. The Medina bookstore will be open every night during and after the program in the month of Ramadan. If you have any questions, see me or one of the organizers after the program. In the holy month of Ramadan, we are taking sponsors each night to help us with our UNI programming, bookstore, and so much more. In our traditions, we usually always donate on behalf of our deceased. General nightly donations are set to $100 per night and $300 to sponsor a suhoor with a scholar event. If you'd like to sponsor a night, please see me or one of the organizers after the program, inshallah. Tonight's donation is on the behalf of Marhum Hajj Kamil Hamqa. If we can please recite Surah Al-Fatiha on his behalf, بعد الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. صراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. Thank you. Make sure to keep up with the UNI on Instagram at UNIORG_. That's at UNIORG_ for weekly programs and events throughout the year. For those who don't have social media, please see me or one of the organizers after the program so we can put you in one of our WhatsApp announcements chat where all details will be shared there as well, inshallah. So without further ado, please help me welcome my sincere friend, my mentor, and my brother, Samahat Sheikh Ahmad Cherri, after 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. I begin in the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. May the peace and blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be upon his final messenger Muhammad and his blessed and purified progeny. Assalamu alaikum, dear brothers, dear sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before we begin, if we can recite a Fatiha for the soul of the late Ayatollah Sayyid Muhammad Rida Hussein al-Jalali, who we mentioned in the first 2 nights. It came to my attention yesterday that he has passed away on the 1st of Shahr Ramadan. So al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. It is only befitting in honor of the late Sayyid to mention a few words about him and my personal experience with him. Without a doubt, the Sayyid shaped very much my understanding of faith and religion and what it means to be a follower of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Sayyid had a full life, and he had experienced many experiences in his journey to where he got to, where eventually he was known within the religious circles as one of the known muhaqqiqs, an individual who goes over Islamic manuscripts. A lot of what we have, we take for granted. The ad'iyah that we have, the books that we have, the hadith that we have, it took people to preserve that knowledge, to collect those books. These are historical artifacts. Over 1,000 years has passed between us and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and specifically within our madhab as well, considering that we were persecuted for hundreds of years. The maintenance of these books and the protection of these books took individuals who sacrificed a lot, and the preservation of these books took individuals who sacrificed their time and their effort and their life to go and look, to travel to different countries, to see whether they can procure or find a remnant. One narration can add to our understanding of the world, to our understanding of religion, can add to our quality of life. And this is something that he dedicated his life to. He was truly a unique individual who also witnessed struggle, witnessed oppression, whose own brother was killed by Saddam Hussein, who had to go through all that hardship. And then he moved to the holy city of Qom, where we were blessed to benefit from his presence. Now, the Sayyid is a student of Imam al-Khomeini. He's a student of Sayyid al-Khou'i. He's a student of Ayatollah Marash al-Najafi. And he's a student of Agha Buzurg al-Tahrani. All these names, some of them might be familiar, some of them might not be. But every single one of these individuals are responsible for everything that we have. Every single Islamic book that you pick up has a copy, its original copy is in the library of Ayatollah Marash al-Najafi, who gave the ijazah of ijtihad, who claimed that Sayyid Jalali was a mujtahid. Sayyid Jalali also had a brother who was in Chicago, and he passed away long before him. And he would open his home on Fridays, where we were blessed, me and my brother Sheikh Abdurrahman, to go to him and benefit from his presence. His door was open. It was literally open. Anybody could walk in. And many people did walk in. The fascinating thing about the Sayyid is that his home was open for everybody. Any seeker of knowledge, any seeker of truth, didn't have to be a scholar. He had many friends that would come over his home that weren't scholars, but they were interested. They took joy and pleasure in his company. And he was a living manifestation and an example of you show your religion through your actions. There are many times when I was going through a very difficult time in a period of my life where I would just go to him just so I could feel some semblance of comfort. When I feel that everything around me is telling me otherwise, telling me, for example, that that there's too much, for example, hypocrisy, or things aren't aligning, or I was having some interactions that were harsh interactions, I would go to him and I would be reminded through that sense of comfort, through his presence, through how he carried himself. Every single time we went, and it was a unique experience because I generally would go to scholars whenever I had the opportunity, to our esteemed Maraja whenever I had the opportunity, and I would have with myself a list of questions. Sayyid Jalali was the only individual where I never spoke when I was in his presence. I never spoke. I just wanted to look at him. I just wanted to observe him. Everything that he did was a lesson. Everything that he did left an impact. I remember every week there was a Sayyid that would come just to argue with him, just to give him a hard time. He would entertain him. Not once did I see him frown in his face. Not once did I see him critique any question. We would sit there and in our minds be like, that's a very antagonistic question. He's obviously trying to give the Sayyid a hard time. Why doesn't he just tell him to stop? Yet he wouldn't. He would not turn down a single individual. He would tell me later in private that he had spoken to my seminary. And this is an ayatullah reaching the highest level that an individual can reach in the Islamic seminary. And said, if you have a question about Arabic grammar, come bring it to me. If you have a question about sarf, come bring it to me. If you have a question on the most basic lessons and subjects within the seminary, come bring it to me. This is in comparison to individuals that I called who were on a lesser level than the Sayyid, who would not see it befitting of them to teach any lower level classes. Yet he wanted to dedicate his life, and he did dedicate his life to Islam, and dedicate his life to spreading the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhum salam. I remember instances where there were individuals who would come from different schools of Tashayyu'. The Sayyid was recognized not just amongst the Shia, he was recognized amongst the Sunnis and given ijazah from them as well. Ijazat al-riwaya. It's not like ijtihad, but permission to narrate. Anyways, that's a whole nother discussion. From the Zaydis, in fact, when the war on Yemen began, the Iranians went and they copied all the manuscripts that are in Sana'a, and they dedicated and they sent copies of them to Sayyid al-Jalali so that he could preserve them, he could work on them. When we wanted to find out the origin of a dua, we would go to his library, which was a rich library, and see whether we could find an original manuscript of that dua, handwritten. I never knew that I had an interest in manuscripts. I never thought about it for once in my life. And this is why, brothers and sisters, when I say experience, and experience can be a teacher, and that we have to experience certain things to learn more about ourselves, and in turn to learn more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we get the question, what does God want from me? Where can I be most useful? And this is a question you can ponder for the rest of your entire life. Where should I be? Am I in the right place? Am I doing the right thing? Sometimes you never know until you go out of your comfort zone. I used to always go and visit the Sayyid, and the Sayyid used to rely on me a lot. Whenever he wanted to bring a book or he wanted to take care of one of his guests, he would rely on me like he would rely on one of his children. And I took pleasure just in being in his service. And one day he pulls out a book from his library, and it's what they call a manuscript catalog. And he gave it to me. Basically, it's a catalog, like a library catalog, of names and titles of manuscripts. 100, 600 years old, 800 years old, 1,000 years old. And he took a paper and a pen. First, he wrote a dedication to me in the first page. Then he took a paper and a pen. He underlined the manuscripts he was looking for, and he gave it to me. And he simply said, if you could do me a favor, look for these manuscripts and come back to me whenever you can, when you have time. And I was overwhelmed with that request, that he would, out of all the, and I was very young. Well, I am young, but younger back then. And so he gave me that book. And so I began searching. And the more I began to pull up books of hadith, I found Uyun Akhbar al-Rida, the riwayat of Imam al-Rida. Very old manuscript, 400 years old, 500 years old. Books from our madhab and from other madhahib where there wasn't even dots under the Arabic handwriting. And I found that not only was I finding these manuscripts, but that I was pretty good at it. And I had a thirst for it. And I began to collect manuscripts and collect manuscripts and collect manuscripts. And eventually I would collect the ones that he listed or the ones that I could find. One which I found in, surprisingly, Penn State University, had a copy of it. Even University of Michigan has copies of our books, manuscripts that belong to us, taken from Iran, taken from Iraq, hundreds of years old, in their archives. I managed to get copies of them, and I presented those manuscripts to the late Sayyid. Had he not given me that task, I would never have known that I have the skill. I would never have known that I have this interest. And that just comes to re-emphasize that sometimes in this journey in life, we cannot always rely on the familiar. We have to try something different. We have to see what skills Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed us with. And when we understand ourselves very well, we can dedicate these skills for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. On the subject of what is my responsibility, what should I do, what should I be doing? And as scholars, we get asked that question a lot. Either what one is looking for is a general answer, point me in a general direction, or we're asking for something specific. Just tell us what to do. I want to be told what direction I should go in. What is the best thing that we can do? And I say, brothers and sisters, especially in these blessed nights, that question should not be posed to the scholar. That question should be posed to yourself and posed to your 12th Imam, Ajjallah Ta'ala Farajahu Sharif. You have to ask the Imam. This is the Imam's function. Again, on the subject of Imamah, we have to ask ourselves this vital question, which is, what are we benefiting from this belief in Imamah? We mentioned in the second night that some people just use this belief in Imamah to cause division, or to point out that, hey, I'm different from other people. طيب, what is the function and the role of this imam? Isn't it to guide you? Isn't it so you can establish a spiritual connection with this imam? So you can speak to this imam? So you can take your teachings from this imam? Then this question should be posed to the imam himself. Every single night, ask yourself this question. What does Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam require of us? What does he want from us? And to better understand what he wants, in the words of the marhum Sheikh Bahjat, he would want what his grandfather wanted from you, what Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa wanted from you, which is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you. That you stay away from all that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala detests, at the very least, and follow and apply your wajibat. To appreciate what we have and the amount of effort it took to receive what we received, we are reminded, brothers and sisters, time and time again. What took place in Lebanon is also a reminder that our identity, what we have, our beliefs, what we strive to do, what we know about ourselves, came with a price. It came with a price. People paid with their lives for your hijab. People paid with their lives for your identity. And that gives us a sense of responsibility when we understand the immense sacrifice that took place. Now and throughout history, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, when he was saying labbaik, or he was asking for ansar, ala min nasirin yansurani, right? He was asking if there's anybody who would answer his call. He was calling upon not the enemies. It wouldn't make sense for Imam Hussein alayhi salam to ask for helpers and assistance from the army that's attacking him. But he knew that that call will reverberate throughout history, and it would reach our ears and it would reach our hearts, and that we would respond to Imam al-Hussein with labbaika ya Hussein. And so we have to understand that our religion, our identity, these ahkam, even if we struggle to accept and understand them, that they came with a heavy weight, that they came with sacrifice. And so every act that we take, even if we don't have a full comprehension or understanding of it, at least we understand and we can appreciate the sacrifice that it took for it to reach us. Now, some of us, maybe culturally, historically, it took that time to reach us. Other individuals, they were not born Muslim. And so they embraced Islam later in life. And it also applies to them that it had to go through so many channels. So many people sacrificed their lives in order for them to come to this sense of understanding. So when we stand on the prayer mat, when we look at the ahkam of salah, when we look at the ahkam of sawm, we should look at it with a newfound appreciation that for me to even understand how to salli, it took people to sacrifice their lives. That at once, and there was a time in history, and it's not that far off, and even today there are attempts to do it, where people try to fight against this understanding of hijab. They try to fight against this understanding of salah. They try to fight against this understanding of valor, of sacrifice. If you look at the Muslim Ummah and you're dissatisfied and you look for the roots of the problem in the Muslim Ummah, it's because there were movements made, tyrants, who tried to remove this understanding of defense, that a person has a right to speak and a right to defend themselves, and they have a responsibility and an obligation towards their fellow men. And that's why the narration with regards to not just fasting, but what it means to be a Muslim. A Muslim is a person who people are at peace, they're at silim from their tongues and from their hands. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the opportunity to not only apply that which we know, but to understand that which we know and to appreciate that which we know. Going back to the subject of Sawm, and we went over yesterday the hadith of Mi'raj, and we said we want to look at the other aspects of fasting. Today, we hope to go over 6 aspects of fasting that are neglected that would be useful to know. If I can find the 6 aspects of fasting that I had prepared, inshallah. اللهم صل على محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. طيب, inshallah, it should be in this document, but I can't seem to find the title. We'll begin with the intention of fasting. بإذنه تعالى. With the intention of fasting, the beauty of an intention is that every act requires that intention. The source of that intention is the heart of the individual. Yani what matters in an act is not the verbal pronunciation of one's intention, but what is understood is that the intention for every act begins in the heart of the individual. And this, by the way, answers a relevant question, which is, well, we talk about presence of heart and having Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always in our heart, but we generally make a distinction between, for example, how we are in a state of prayer and our job. Some people say that my job takes me away from my spirituality. My studies take me away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They take up too much of my time. Should I dedicate a certain part of my time or try to work less so I can have more time for God? And is this what Islam has come to teach us? That we have to dedicate our entire lives to God, which means that we have to, especially in a capitalistic society, in a society that's pulling us in many directions. And sometimes we're forced to work hours that kind of strike off the balance within our lives. So how do we navigate that so that we can maintain consistency with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And this comes back down to the intention, brothers and sisters. Every act that we do can be done seeking nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We are the ones that make the distinction. The distinction is not there. Al-kad ala iyalih kal-mujahid fi sabilillah. The one who strives to make money for his family is like the one who's fighting on the battlefield. Fi sabilillah. This is a well-known narration. But if you are striving to make money for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to take care of your family, this is a blessed pursuit. It's a pursuit that will only take you further and nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So every act that we do in our lives, it comes down to a matter of intention. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He sees your act, when He sees you on campus, when He sees you at work, the question Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for you is, where is your heart? Am I part of the equation or am I not? Everything that you do, the cup of water that you drink, the way that you sit, the time that you sleep, when you go to the gym, when you go to university, when you go to work, how you deal with the customer at work, if you are, or any interaction that you have, if you bring pleasure and joy into a person's heart, that's a beloved act in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you do it qurbatan Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you get angry in a situation and you decide to swallow your anger and you do it for God's sake, then that very act becomes like a prayer. It brings you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So having constant presence of God within your heart, presence of heart, requires what? A proper intention. And an intention can begin as simple and then it can become complex. It begins as a seed that you plant that you have to constantly water. The more you water it through experience, the more it blooms and it develops. You find other means of finding the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some people ask as well that we are sometimes put in a situation where we don't know what's best for us. And we've heard this from our scholars and from individuals who had to make bigger decisions, decisions that had greater consequences. That the individual that has tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala surrenders their affairs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if the outcome of what you were going to do was going to be negative, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will change the outcome to the positive. It'll be in your best interest. This is tawakkul ala Allah azza wa jal, to surrender our affairs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It begins with the heart. It begins with the intention. There's categories of fasters, or those who fast based on intentions. There are some people who fast for other than God. Some people fast for reasons other than seeking closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as to avoid the criticism of others, for personal benefits, or simply because it's a common practice amongst Muslims. This is a rare case in Western societies, because we can get away here with not fasting. But in Islamic societies where stores close, where it's frowned upon to fast in public, you might be able to not fast in public, or to drink and eat during the time of fasting in public. That might be a common phenomenon. The second is fasting for other than God with some fear and hope. Some fast due to a mixture of motivations, combining worldly reasons with a slight fear of punishment from God and hope for reward. To worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of hope and out of fear of punishment. This is the most common form of worship. Sometimes we're put in a scenario where we fear death, we're reminded of death, and that fear is a good motivator. Or sometimes we seek something so badly, and that thing that we seek becomes the motivator for worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that kind of taints our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But in the narrations, one is told not to be harsh upon themselves. We live in a very fast-paced world. And the whole year, and come after me when? After the next Laylatul Qadr. So the expectation was, don't think I'm going to do X act for a month or 2 months, and then after that I'll move on to the next thing. He said it's sufficient to perfect that which you already know, and then start with the next thing next year. Things take time to grow. Industrial revolution, things began to move at a faster pace. But when we used to be more involved in farming and connecting with nature, we understood that this reality, that growth takes time, and that growth requires certain conditions, and that growth requires the plant to go through various seasons to get to where it has to get. The human being is no different. You are no different. During Shahr Ramadan, there are individuals who struggle to connect with the Holy Quran. And they say, for example, that I cannot, when I open the Quran, establish that heart-to-heart connection. It doesn't click with me. And I might be able to recite a few verses, and after that, I get tired. And they begin to resent themselves and resent their state. And they're filled with a sense of guilt. The Quran is supposed to be a book that fills you with light, that fills you with joy. Religiosity, as we said yesterday, is none other than seeking happiness. Religious people, the narrations mention that they are sad. They're sad at their distance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're sad because they miss their beloved. They want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That separation between them and the beloved causes them pain. But in the narrations, the religious person doesn't show that sadness to anybody else. Religious people are supposed to be people who always have a smile on their face. They're always happy, they're always laughing, always kind. Why? Because they understand the reality of this world. They understand that the closest thing that they can do, the best thing that they can do to gain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to bring relief to other individuals' hearts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want you to have that sense of guilt within your heart when you are in salah, when you recite the Quran. These unrealistic expectations that we set for ourselves, we're setting ourselves up for failure. It's not about reciting X number of verses. It's about perfecting that which we recite. Even if it's one verse of the Quran, even if it's one page of the Quran a day, if that's your limit and that's your capacity, follow your limit and follow your capacity. There are other ways to bring about the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't want you to read the Quran right now. Maybe your place and your duty is something else. Maybe it's assisting your father. Maybe it's assisting your mother. Maybe it's looking for other means. Maybe it's working on yourself. You have to have a healthy relationship with who you are in order to maintain that healthy relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes He'll put things on a pause and say that you have to manage your priorities. We look for a traditional understanding of religion and we attach ourselves to the external manifestations. But there's an event that we're all familiar with that changes all of that, which is Karbala. Karbala comes in the middle and changes our entire understanding. Throughout your entire year, you hear and you are told that a religious individual should way, and way, and they have actions something else to consider. Because you look at the companions of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. You look at Hur, who is on the complete opposite end. He's the one that stops Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And he's the one that threatens Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. An individual in that state then changes in a moment, makes the right decision, and joins the camp of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. We have other narrations of other companions of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Can you hear me now in the back? Yeah, inshallah. So we'll bring the microphone closer as well. So we look at the that might give me a chance and an opportunity to find what I was looking for. Inshallah. اللهم صل على اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل. All right, is this better? I don't think it is. Inshallah. All right. So let's test. Can the brothers in the back hear me? All right. We were saying that the companions. يلا خير إن شاء الله. الله يعينكم إن شاء الله. I'll try to speak louder and I'll try to ارفع صوتي إلى حد ما. We were saying that the companions of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam come and change the entire equation for all of us. We have a certain understanding of what a religious person has to be, a person who is with their imam has to be, And then Imam Hussein comes to show us that no, the criteria is much larger than what is socially understood. And so we have to understand, now it's mashallah. I can hear myself and it's very, alhamdulillah, that the criteria is much greater than that which we originally think or consider it to be. A lot of what we understand of the traditional mold of religiosity is in reality sometimes in conflict with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we understand from the Holy Quran. Sometimes we have a very narrow understanding of religiosity. And that narrow and black and white understanding of what it means to be religious is in conflict with something that we know is to be true and to be real. And that's why I always emphasize to rely on your experience, what you know to be true. Because you have the verses of the Holy Quran as understood and as taught to us by our esteemed scholars. And then you have the world around you, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also describes as ayat. And that experience with the world around you is supposed to teach you equally about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every field that you're in should point to the same truth and to the same reality about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about who God is. This entire world is an introduction of God introducing Himself to you through every interaction, through every individual. And when you look at the world around you, you don't find it black and white. You find diversity, diversity in culture, diversity in understanding, diversity in hobbies, diversity in passions, diversity in fields. And if that diversity didn't exist, we wouldn't be in a hole today. If we didn't have individuals who had an interest in electricity and how it works and how to control it and resistors and circuits and so on, we wouldn't be able to have lights, we wouldn't be able to have this microphone. If we didn't have individuals who were interested in art and calligraphy, we wouldn't be able to have this calligraphy that we see around us. If we didn't have individuals who were so interested in construction and building things, we wouldn't be able to have buildings. That this diversity all complements one another. It adds to our quality of life. And religion is no different. We all look for a specific mold to fall into, when in reality we have to look within. Every single one of us has various different skills, various different talents that we can dedicate and that we can use towards gaining the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The best of you, according to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa is the one who is most benefit, brings most benefit to those who are around him. The most benefit, the most beneficial one to his community, his or her community. So you have to ask yourself, what do we need? And I get this question a lot from individuals who are either already religious and want to go further in their religious understanding. They ask, can we go to the seminary? Or should we go to the seminary? Or what do you recommend about the seminary? And I answer the same answer every single time. We don't need more seminarians. We need God-fearing individuals in every single field. We need God-fearing therapists. We need God-fearing psychiatrists. We need God-fearing doctors. We need God-fearing nurses, God-fearing lawyers, God-fearing architects. An individual with that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the taqwa, the piety, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all these fields. The seminary is there to perform a certain function. Yes, if somebody has an immense interest and they think that they could add something, they should go. But if not, think about the various ways, the various needs within your community and how you can fulfill these needs, especially as our community is growing larger and larger. For example, sometimes we come up with certain initiatives and we don't think them through. We build an Islamic school, but that school requires teachers. You should have got the people to go into education first. Have a staff that is educated, that's God-fearing. Then you go and you build the facility, or simultaneously you build the facility, knowing that you have the capacity to employ individuals who are able to teach properly. We have to think, what are the problems that our community faces? And we shouldn't be waiting on individuals to come and save us. Together, we have to work hand in hand with our talents, with what we have to offer and bring to the table, and bring change about within our community. This is something that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is where the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lies. Not in somebody going overseas and being gone for 10, 15 years and then coming back and finding that, the situation hasn't gotten any better. Where they were in a position where they could have changed, they could have done something, and they abandoned that responsibility. Everybody has a role to play. And you have to look within and understand what is my capacity, what are my abilities, and what can I bring to the table. And that requires a certain level of sense of responsibility and a certain level of self-understanding and a certain level of creativity as well. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And the more you go over the narrations, the more you find this to be true. For example, we have a narration that says, an hour of reflection is better than 70 years of worship. And narrations along those lines, where the human being is called to recognize that humane aspect of themselves. And that's one of the unique things of fasting as well. As mentioned yesterday, that this is a call from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and a God-given duty that is not given to any other creature other than the human being. And the choice of saying no to one's desires is a uniquely human choice. And that's why Ayatollah Hassan Zadi Amuli, for example, would say that Islam came to create or to make you a human being, to move you away from the animalistic state, to make you less animal in your desires, in your perspective, in your lifestyle, in how you go about your life. To truly understand what it means to be a human being is to move away from all that which is in common between you and the animal world, to reconnect with that spiritual reality, which is why we hope that when you open the Quran and you read the Quran during this blessed month, you realize that there is something about the Quran that's very unique, that a lot of it is dedicated to metaphysics. A lot of it is dedicated to unseen realities. It doesn't deal with necessarily the vast majority of it, to practical, material, day-to-day things. It emphasizes the hereafter. It emphasizes the soul. It emphasizes reward. Reward that is not necessarily visible here and now. It emphasizes the effect of certain deeds on one's heart, all related to the unseen. Re-emphasizing to the individual that you have, what you are, is that soul. And that soul should be your main priority and your main goal. And the effects that you should be worried about from your deeds and where you're going in the future is where your soul is going and the effect that your deeds are having on your soul. And we said that this soul requires growth. One of the commentaries on the state of the soul by Ayatollah Misbah al-Yazdi, for example, he says that had it not been for the Imams, then we would not know what we would require for our soul. If you ask the average individual in their dua, on Layali al-Qadr, had it not been for dua tawassul, had it not been for dua kumail, had it not been for our duas, which by the way are very, very unique. If you want to introduce anybody to your madhab, introduce them to Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. Introduce them to Sahif al-Sajjadiyya. Introduce them to Mafatih al-Jinan. You will not find anywhere else in Islamic history the words and descriptions that you will find in our ad'i. It's very, very, very telling. And in Sufi circles, according to one of my teachers, when he went to Hajj, he was in Hajj and there was a Sufi grandmaster there or something in Tawaf or whatever that's supposed to mean. And so he was there and he told him, they had several conversations, and my teacher tells me that he was so impressed by him. He said, I want to give you a gift that only the highest individuals in the highest order of our path receive. And he was excited to see what it is that they have. They have certain invocations and certain ad'i that they rely on. And he gave him dua Jawshan al-Kabir. And he told them, brother, our children recite Dua Jawshan al-Kabir. But it's true that that Sufi master understood perhaps the value of Dua Jawshan. And that's why he reserved it for a select circle. So anyways, when it comes to our ad'i, we have to reflect and ponder on every word and ask ourselves that if it was up to us, we say, oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, based on the Q&As that we're getting every night, is it nasib or is it maktub? Oh Allah, grant me a good husband or grant me a good wife. Oh Allah, grant me a good job. Oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, expand my wealth or help me in my degree or help me in my studies. Or cure me of this illness, this physical illness, cure me of this disease. Had it not been for the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, we would not be asking for perfection of our character. Do we consider our character? Do we know our flaws as individuals? Am I an angry person? And if I am, I shouldn't be asking for wealth. Wealth is the bare minimum. It's the dirt of this world. We should be asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help me with my anger. If I had a bad relationship with my parent or my sibling, oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, give me the patience or the wisdom. Give me the tolerance. These are the things that we should be asking for. So had it not been for their guidance and their words, we would not be asking for the things that we have to be asking for. And we would not be asking for the things that are beneficial to our soul. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us greater clarity, inshallah, and peace of heart and mind and soul. بحق محمد وآل محمد والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.